Hello, and welcome to Vision Zero Vignettes. I hope everyone's enjoying the 7th annual Vision Zero Cities Conference. We've got a very fun session for you lined up over the next hour. You'll hear from 5 people who are working to make Vision Zero a reality across different arenas. I personally love these vignettes because they illustrate that Vision Zero is more than a policy, but that it's carried out by individuals who are embedded in their communities. We know that there's no single way to ensure that our roads are safe, and the variety of our speakers today shows that there's many different ways of reaching the Vision Zero goal. It's my pleasure to return this year as your MC. My name is Bahij Chancey. I'm the secretary of the board at TA, and I co-chair the policy committee. I'm also an urban planner at WXY Studio. Now, wasting no time, let's jump in to introduce our speakers. First, we'll hear from Juliet Eldred, a founder of New Urbanist Memes for Transit-Oriented Teens. After Juliet, we'll listen to Rebecca Sonkin, a member of Families for Safe Streets. Following Rebecca, we'll have Linda Samuels, an associate professor of urban design at Washington University and author of Infrastructural Optimism. Next, we'll have Ya-Ting Liu, director of government affairs and policy at VIA, and a former leader in the New York City campaign for congestion pricing. And last but not least, we'll welcome Vignesh Swaminathan, principal at Crossroad Lab, or as you may know him on social media, Mr. Barricade. A quick note about the format before we begin. Today's vignettes will be just a morsel, just a sample of the work that our incredible speakers are up to. That means they'll just be 10 minutes each. Each speaker will receive a visual cue and an audible warning before their time is up from our wonderful staff at TA. If you have questions for the speakers, please put them into the chat, and our staff at TA are going to help us filter those and see if we can ask them if there's time at the end of each of their talks. No guarantees, it's a short amount of time. If there's any time left at the very end of the session, we'll also return to questions. Now, without further ado, let's jump into our first talk. If you know what Numtot means, I'm sure you're excited for our first speaker. Juliet Eldred is a transit professional and an artist. She's a project manager at Trillium Transit, a transit technology consulting firm. Juliet is also co-founder of the urban planning and public transit themed Facebook group, New Urbanist Memes for Transit-Oriented Teens, or Numtot. Please take it away, Juliet.
All right, thank you so much for the introduction, and let's get started. A moment, please. Need to share my screen. All right. Need to get rolling real quick. Sorry. Oh my God. It'd be nice if Google Drive were to let me actually present my talk. All right, okay, so can you see my screen now, folks?
Yeah, we can, thanks, Juliet.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry about that. My screen just keeps intermittently turning off, which is deeply stressful, but I will make it work. Anyway, so as you may know, I am co-founder of Numtot, New Urbanist Memes for Transit-Oriented Teens. So basically, I'm just going to talk a little bit about things I've learned from the group and sort of how the lessons I've learned from the group are relevant and useful to Vision Zero. So what is Zompot? It's basically a Facebook meme and discussion group focused on urban planning and public transit issues. It started in, my friend and I, in undergrad, we started it in March of 2017. It was basically a throwaway joke while we were procrastinating on our winter quarterfinals. I was a senior and my friend Emily, she's a sophomore, both geography students. And we both just wanted to, make jokes about Jane Jacobs and Robert Moses, things like that. And eventually the group started to grow a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. Now it has 220,000 members. And it really doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like, it didn't come out totally of nowhere. Like, Emily and I had started a group a couple months prior called I Feel Personally Attacked by This Relatable Map, which is kind of like a GIS and like cartography group. And so, yes, this is that. So Numtot was actually a spinoff of that. And there are also a lot of other groups kind of in this universe. A lot of them were like college-focused groups. So that's where the kind of blank memes for blank teens name origin comes from. And so, so here's a couple of examples of some higher quality and funnier, in my opinion, memes that have been in the group in the past couple of years. These are just a small sampling of the kinds of content we get. Like most of the things in the group are just sort of people sharing articles and discussions, but every so often we get some actual memes, and those are always the highlights of the group, because I think that, not only are they funny, but they also can convey like deeper and more serious topics and kind of demystify sort of technical things. Like here, SpongeBob definitely a good used very frequently in memes, and also like, explains what the 85th percentile limit is, which is a pretty technical thing that, this crowd almost certainly knows about, but, the average layperson wouldn't. But now you have at least a better idea, at least know what to Google if you want to learn more. Likewise, the BRT alignment chart uses the alignment chart meme format, usually that comes sort of like from Dungeons and Dragons role-playing games like that, but kind of applies it to, different forms of bus rapid transit. So, which I find deeply funny. So Numtot has really grown a lot in a lot of ways, not only just in terms of its members, but also in terms of its kind of broader impact. We've gotten, I've been interviewed by journalists at various points. It definitely was a big sort of ego boost, taking my lunch hour at my, entry-level job right out of college to talk to New York Times reporter, things like that. But in all seriousness, though, it has been, a lot of people have been very interested in this group and outside of it as well. And like in January of 2020, we endorsed Bernie Sanders for the presidential election. And that definitely made some waves. And the Bernie Sanders official Facebook page, wrote us, posted in the group and wrote a thank you note. And so that was a pretty wild couple of days. And so, yeah, beyond just Facebook, Numtot also has a lot of impact in social media. And that, like on the image on the left is a screenshot of TikTok. Videos tagged with Numtot have gotten almost 15 million views. And then on Instagram, over 5,000 posts have been tagged with it. Alex Lee is, I believe, our first official Numtot legislator, who I think was inspired by the group, at least in part, to run for state assembly in California, and I believe recently introduced a bill, social housing bill for the state. We also have Wikipedia page. So, yeah. So after saying all this, like, why has this group resonated with people? Like, why did it get so big? There's a lot of reasons, but on the surface, the average person, these issues can often seem kind of boring, dull, technical, not really relevant to their lives. But nearly anyone who lives in a city can tell stories of like a time they got screwed over by public transit, something really bizarre they experienced on it, or something really nice that they experienced on it. And this also goes kind of more broadly for like streets and, the places that they live and the built environment in general. And you can get people to care about these issues because they really, truly do affect everybody. We all have to go places. We all have to get from A to B. We all live somewhere. And so it really is sort of very much a fundamental kind of part of our lives. And so means of fun internet content are a way kind of tapping into these feelings and can kind of illustrate more technical concepts in simpler ways and kind of get more people on board, and also provide a way to kind of people sort of bond with one another as well. So unfortunately, for many, many reasons right now, Vision Zero is not doing a great job for a lot of reasons that are not the fault at all of anyone in this conference. It really is an issue of political will, in that there's not enough political will to actually implement the infrastructure and material changes that we need to ensure that people aren't killed by cars. And it sucks, but there is definitely potential to shift that. And in terms of the Overton Window is a conceptual framework from political science. It's definitely a term that's been used a lot in the past couple of years. I think it's useful. It's actually, in researching this, it turns out it's like this guy from some like obscure conservative think tank in Michigan or something who came up with this concept, but it's definitely outlived that use. But in any case, basically describes what's politically possible at any given moment, and that political will really can be built in part through changing narratives and exposing people to a wider range of possibilities. And that is something I think Numtot's been pretty good at, because for a lot of people, you grew up in a suburb and you drove everywhere and you never walked anywhere, like the notion that you could live without a car is pretty radical to you. And so there's a lot of ways that the Overton Window can be shifted, including grassroots activism, which includes posting. So here's a brief sort of illustration. Basically, like I pulled the green diagram from Google Images, but essentially at present, the current policy is the status quo, which is that 40,000 people in the US are killed by cars each year. That is enabled at pretty much every possible level of government and funding through the way we fund highways and don't fund transit and don't fund bike infrastructure, and all the people who drive everywhere who are demanding that this is the case, and all the other things that make that possible. Right now, I put Vision Zero somewhere between radical and acceptable, in that, getting down to zero car deaths is still a pretty radical thing, but also there are, like most major cities have like Vision Zero departments. Is some, institutional support and infrastructure for it, even if it's not really there yet. So it's inching toward acceptable, but it's still not quite there. But of course, where we need to be, it's easy to be flipped. Eventually, we want to get to the point where Vision Zero is policy, where no one is killed by a car. We have streets that are for people and for transit and for, are safe for everybody, and no one is killed by a car. And that the idea that so many people were, killed or seriously injured and disabled by vehicles would just be truly unthinkable. That is what we're working toward fundamentally. And you all know that, but I like to illustrate it as this bluntly. I think it's helpful. So one example, is before 2016, anyone running for office, if they identified as socialist, that was pretty much a political non-starter, Bernie Sanders being a major exception there. But, that was just not really a thing people did. But after Trump was elected, the appetite for more radical change began to grow because people were just like, it is clear incrementalism is not really getting us where we need to go, and we need to resist this, orange man bad. We need to, we need to resist all these things. And so there's definitely a desire for more growth there. And so these orgs started growing and running candidates for office and winning in many cases because, their plans and ideas resonated with people. And so things like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal are becoming increasingly popular. We're not quite there yet for many, many reasons. Hopefully, Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin just get out of the way and let some things happen. Maybe that would be nice. But, same deal about DSA. I definitely have some issues with them as an org, though I am still a dues paying member. But I do think that they've done, this whole thing. This is a good example of things shifting because a lot has changed in the past couple of years. And I think that is ultimately an example we can learn from. So now what? Basically, we want to expose more people to the underlying concept of Vision Zero, which is not only that people shouldn't be, killed by cars, but also that we need to build streets that are for people, that are, safe, and not only safe, but also enjoyable and pleasurable to navigate. Like, there are definitely many places where like you can just nice little streets that are nice to walk on and are fun to be on. Like that is important. And, the fact that people shouldn't be killed by cars is not a universally agreed upon statement in many circles, shows how far we have to go. Just check any internet comment section after anyone's been hit by a car. You will immediately see victim blaming and all sorts of horrible things. But basically, we want to use all available channels that we have for doing so, which unfortunately does include things like Nextdoor, Citizen, comments of news sites, things like that. The battle is honestly fought there as well, because when the only comments are people saying don't take away our parking, we need more funding for highways, the pavement's bad, don't reduce the speed limit, I need to be able to drive. If those are the only things people ever see. But if even just people arguing a little more next door and places like that, saying, hey, I am in favor of this bike lane, or I think we should use traffic calming on my block, or whatever it is, that does help, at least inform passersby that it is not the universally agreed on opinion that, the loudest minority has. And basically posting, is one way to get more people engaged, make concepts more acceptable, and overall shift the discourse. And so thus with more people, there's more a greater ability to pressure decision makers and thus build the political will, because it makes people, growing the constituency makes us harder to ignore. And this is also, posting will not save the world, obviously. This is only a very, very small part of everything that actually needs to happen when it comes to advocacy and changes in the built environment and funding and infrastructure, things like that. So I do not have the one magical, this one weird trick will solve everything. I make no claims to that. And anyone who does say that is a grifter or a liar, essentially. So yeah, that's what I've had prepared. These are a couple of beans from my my personal collection, as in I've made them over the past few years, and I figured they'd be a fun sort of note to end on. I included a link at the bottom to join the group. It's facebook.com/group/what-would-Jane-Jacobs-do. Also a couple of my own links while we're here. So I think that's everything. And the little timer on my phone says I'm about to hit 10 minutes. So thank you all. Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me, and I'm excited to hear everybody else's talks.
Thank you so much, Juliet. That was wonderful. Too bad you don't have that silver bullet. Folks, if you've got questions for the panelists, please put them into the chat. For now, I'll ask a question, Juliet. I'm curious, it can't be that everybody in this group is a transit professional and an urbanist. Who do you think are the people that make up the group? Who is brought to Numtot that aren't professionally in this world?
Yeah, so actually, it's a pretty wide group. Especially at the beginning, a lot of people be like, I think trains are cool, or my friend added me. A lot of people, it's like, oh, this is fun. I'll add my friends. And when I was first starting the group, I definitely added a lot of people who I thought, who were in other Facebook groups that I ran or was involved with. And so I think it's just sort of thing where people, have friends and add their friends and add their friends. And I think a lot of people in the group are transit professionals, but also are people who just, maybe thought trains were cool when they were a kid, but didn't really realize that it could be a career. And definitely a lot of people in the group who I've had people I've known through various other means who are now kind of much more militant when it comes to bike and pedestrian stuff, and at least in part through the group and being in this sort of space. But I think, yeah, there's a lot of reasons why people sort of ended up there, but that was, a nice thing about the kind of weird Facebook ecosystem, is that there already were a lot of extremely niche groups. And so I think people were definitely open to the idea of being in more niche groups because of that, just hyper-specific stuff, trying to think of other examples of ones, but like the map group is a good example. There's a lot of stuff like that where it was just, you know, and sometimes it can be fun to just sort of see things like that. And what else? But there definitely are also a lot of professionals, and there's a couple of like bus drivers and like train conductors who actively post, and I always love seeing their content. A lot of planners, a lot of people who, you know, decided to become planners because of the group, or, you know, chose to study certain things because of it. But it's definitely a very wide net. And of course, that also means that the group is not a hive mind by any means. There are definitely a lot of people who often do kind of have reactionary opinions about biking and transit in ways that are personally kind of hard for me to fathom. But also it's like, you know, if your friend added you to the group where you just joined because you think, you know, trains are cool, but haven't actually thought about parking policy, like I could see how you could get to certain bad takes, frankly. But also, you know, any group of 220,000 people is not a monolith, but like on the whole, it's like, you know, at its best is it's like kind of a combination of like weird nerds and professionals and people who are happy to learn.
Thanks so much, Juliet. And thank you for inspiring that conversation too. Much needed. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker as well. While some of us come to this work professionally, some of us have also witnessed firsthand the devastating results that traffic violence can have on our communities and on our families. Rebecca Sonkin is an activist with Families for Safe Streets. She's also reporting a book about the car crash that killed her brother. Her essays have appeared in the Washington Post, Tablet, Tin House, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and elsewhere. Please join me in welcoming Rebecca. Oh, you're muted, Rebecca.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Hooray. Okay, well, thanks, Bahij, and thanks everyone for tuning into Vision Zero Vignettes. My name is Rebecca Sonkin, and I'm here with Families for Safe Streets. I'm going to start this talk by introducing you to my brother, Paul Sonkin. He's the reason I'm in Families for Safe Streets. This is his last school picture. He was in 10th grade and he was 15 years old. He was as cute and jokey and easygoing, as funny as this picture suggests. Obviously, I'm completely biased. A few months after he sat for this picture, he turned 16, and a few months after that, Paul was dead. All Paul wanted to do was go to soccer camp. His friend offered him a lift. For 45 minutes, they drove on unfamiliar freeways to get to a soccer camp just outside of Ann Arbor in Michigan. Let's pause there. Two 16-year-old boys drove for 45 minutes on unfamiliar freeways to get to a school activity. When it came time to turn off the freeway, Paul's friend hit the ramp at such speed that the car flipped off the road entirely. Eyewitnesses say the car flipped with such force that they never could confirm the number of times that the car turned over. Paul didn't die right away. A helicopter full of medical workers came for him. They performed open heart CPR. Doctor friends have told me that this means Paul's chest was cut open and his rib cage was also cracked open so that the hands of medical workers could press directly onto the flesh of Paul's 16-year-old heart in an effort to pump it back to life. Their efforts, my friends assure me, were legion, and I believe them. Still, Paul died. He died alone at the hospital before our parents could even get there. Let's rewind the clock. Just a couple hours earlier, Paul had had lunch with our parents on the back deck of our family home near Detroit. They ate Kaiser rolls and cream cheese and Nova, his favorites, and slices of homemade coffee cake, also his favorite. He and our dad dribbled the soccer ball back and forth on the driveway while they waited for his friend to come pick him up. Back then, Paul was a perfectly healthy teenage boy, but now he was dead. As a country, how do we tolerate the death of a perfectly healthy teenage boy? As a country, how do we shrug? There's nothing we can do about it. As I say, Paul was 16 when he was killed. I was 18. It's been 29 years, and the abrupt and senseless death of my brother remains the defining event of my life. This death has bisected my life. It fractured my family. Who knew Paul was the pin holding us all together? But I want to tell you about my own children, because traffic violence is an intergenerational trauma. If it were my dad here talking to you, he'd talk about my children missing out on an uncle and cousins and so on. For me, those absences, they're hard to conjure. That's why I'll tell you about my children instead. Their lives are constricted. I keep a shared document, for example, that polices which streets my kids are permitted to cross and which streets are forbidden to them. Our routes to school and activities and home again are circuitous, completely cockamamie. Our routes are completely cockamamie unless you consider the death traps that all cities and municipalities across the US permit to exist and permit to kill. And so 29 years after Paul's death, the lives of my children are constricted. Their peers enjoy freedoms and modes of independence that I cannot allow because I so fear them getting run over in the street. I so fear becoming a bereaved parent like mine before me. Well-meaning people tell me to back off. These are other parents, teachers, a pediatrician who is no longer our pediatrician. These well-meaning people say my rules and restrictions are weird. They say my rules and restrictions limit my kids. They're not wrong, but I also know the price of backing off, and I'm not willing to pay it. I discovered Families for Safe Streets 25 years after Paul was killed. Until I discovered Families for Safe Streets, I hadn't realized how isolated I was in my grief. I hadn't even realized how isolated I was in my cobbled together efforts to protect my children. Now I know I don't have to be so alone. Structural change can happen. It's on all of us to make it so. Families for Safe Streets confronts traffic violence through advocacy and support. Together, we share our personal stories in a drive to transform our streets into human-centered safe spaces for everyone in every age group, community, neighborhood, income bracket, ability, skin color, religious group, political affiliation, and so on. Everyone deserves the dignity of safe passage as they go about their daily lives. No one deserves to suffer the grief so intimately known to the members of Families for Safe Streets. No one deserves to have their lives changed so irrevocably. The change we seek is structural and cultural, but these changes are neither radical nor innovative. Citizens of peer nations expect these protections, and they get these protections. We know these protections work because as soon as they're instituted, deaths plunge and they stay depressed. In the US, by contrast, we do nothing. People keep getting killed and families keep getting broken. From my view, three components of Families for Safe Streets are what make it so productive on the policy front and so healing on the human front. First, Families for Safe Streets is a constituency movement. Everyone in it is intimately touched by traffic violence. We've all got skin in the game. I'll pause here to add that we also have ally organizations such as Friends of Families for Safe Streets, and if you fall into that category, please join us that way. Next are Families for Safe Streets' twin points of focus, support, and advocacy. Our support modes take numerous forms, from forest baths and meditation, things I swore I'd never try, to the monthly emails that commemorate birthdays and death and injury dates. Every August, Paul was killed in August, I get emails from people I've only recently met, checking in on how I'm doing, letting me know they're thinking of me and of Paul. Our second point of focus is advocacy. For such a young organization, we've accomplished a lot. We've lowered the speed limit in New York City. We've expanded automated enforcement in front of schools, which also limits direct contact with police officers. We've expunged from policy reports the word accident, which suggests that traffic violence cannot be prevented. In May, we hit the road. That's right. As newspapers reported a nationwide surge in traffic violence and deaths, a group of people traumatized by traffic violence took a road trip. In our quest to call attention to the Crash Victims' Rights and Safety Act, we traveled 1,000 miles to commemorate the 1,000 people killed in New York in 2020. The CVRSA is a package of 8 life-saving bills that addresses rampant speeding, incentivizes the purchase of safer vehicles, holds dangerous drivers accountable, combats impaired driving, protects our most vulnerable street users, and supports those personally impacted by crashes. 4 of these bills passed the New York State Senate, but none, not one, made it to the floor of the New York State Assembly for a vote. This is mystifying. It's mystifying that our elected officials full on blew off an opportunity to make life-saving changes in the midst of a preventable public health crisis. It's mystifying because every proposed bill is backed up by data and research and successful life-saving implementation in peer nations, such as the EU and Japan, as well as nations we don't even consider our peers, such as Colombia and Slovenia. It's mystifying that our political leaders don't want to save the lives of their constituents with measures that are pretty bland. Why is it legal for a grown man to consume 4 alcoholic drinks in 1 hour and then get behind the wheel of a car? Why shouldn't speed cameras protect school children from dangerous drivers in front of their schools everywhere? Why wouldn't the state guarantee rights and a voice for crash victims and their loved ones in legal proceedings in the way those rights are guaranteed to crime victims? Let me be clear. Making these changes is a challenge all over the country, at every level of government. The challenge of the federal government has become the most mystifying of all. President Biden lost his first wife and infant daughter to this preventable public health crisis. It's key to his political story. It's key to his mantle of Mr. Empathy. Where is the president in the drive for safe streets? Let the president and every elected official around the country hear the call. Join us. Join Families for Safe Streets, the Vision Zero Network, the Road to Zero Coalition, and hundreds of other organizations calling for the United States to join the world community by adopting Vision Zero and committing to a safe systems approach. Join us on November 21st to mark World Day of Remembrance for Traffic Victims. Join those personally impacted in your local community. In the name of all victims of traffic violence, join our fight in the drive for zero traffic deaths. You can start right now by tweeting in support of the bill at #ZeroTrafficDeaths. On behalf of Families for Safe Streets, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that powerful talk. I'm so sorry about your brother.
Thank you.
We do have time for a question. Again, to our audience, please put your questions into the chat or into the Q&A function, excuse me. Rebecca, I'm curious to know, what do you think transport professionals, urban planners, folks who make this kind of planning decision, what can they stand to learn from listening to folks like you who have been so personally affected and touched by traffic violence? And how do you think that message can be best communicated? How can we bring those people together?
I have a couple of thoughts. I think I'd first go back to your opening remarks, that the people on this panel were all individuals working toward the goal of Vision Zero in many ways. And we all need each other. We need the technicians, the professionals, people like Juliet, Eldred really firing up social media, which is a completely foreign landscape to an old person like me. But it's the stories that move people. And I think, the title of this talk is channeling the grief of traffic violence into political activism. I think showing people who are traumatized that there is something that they can actually do and that there are professionals who can help them implement these solutions are, I think it's key to our success. As you said in your opening remarks, the way that we get to Vision Zero is it's holistic. And we need to recognize that and work in that way. And as far as how do we work together, I think it's continuing the conversation in forums like this and elsewhere.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that you found Families for Safe Streets and were able to turn that grief into that activism, and that they found you because you are a powerful spokesperson on their behalf.
Thank you.
After Rebecca, we now have the pleasure of welcoming Linda Samuels. As Congress debates what constitutes infrastructure, our next speaker is way ahead of them. Linda Samuels is going to help us understand what next generation infrastructure is and what that means. Linda is an associate professor of urban design at Washington University in St. Louis, where she focuses on infrastructural urbanism, urban history and theory, and alternative sustainability metrics. Linda formerly directed the Sustainable City Project at the University of Arizona, and her most recent book, Infrastructural Optimism, focuses on the value of leveraging large-scale infrastructure investments for greater social and environmental gains. Please join me in welcoming Linda.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Let me share my screen here. Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca, for that beautiful talk as well. So as Bahij mentioned, I have a new book called Infrastructural Optimism. And I want to talk today about just a few points from my new project. And this is the question I want to pose to you all first. My question is this. It's 2021, it's almost 2022, and why are we still building infrastructure like it's 1956? We have an efficiency-only paradigm that is outdated, and as billions of dollars worth of public systems become obsolete, environmental challenges intensify, and social inequities persist and widen, we have to design better infrastructure, and we have to design infrastructure better. So I argue that we have to go from last generation infrastructure, which is resource intensive, spatially and socially disruptive, and does one thing at a time typically, to next generation infrastructure, which contributes to the reduction of these damages and divides, utilizes interdisciplinary design thinking to improve the quality of experience and quality of life for anyone who uses it. I call this infrastructural opportunism. And that means that how do we leverage these large scale investments that we're already making for greater social and environmental change? And this is just one example. If we're spending between $17 and $75 million per lane per mile to build an interstate, we should be getting more than what the DOTs called the flat and black. So how is it that we do this? And I say that we've got to go from the red arrow scenario to the green arrow scenario. We have to have strategies for achieving these next generation infrastructure projects. And these strategies include broadening the process, including more people, providing agency for residents, and opening up the conversation to cross-disciplinary conversations and multiple agencies who might be involved. We have to transform the prototype, which I'll get to in a second. We have to measure what matters. It's no longer just about growth for the sake of growth, but we have to think about what that growth actually means. We have to recognize the cost of loss, things like traffic accidents and air pollution, but also the value of social gains, like volunteering or working in the home. And all of those have to come together to shift the paradigm. So today I want to talk about this idea of transforming the prototype. Instead of the status quo solutions that we often turn to, because that's what we've done for generation after generation, we have to get rid of those obsolete, unsustainable, and unrealistic ideas, seek bigger goals, and incorporate next generation infrastructure. Now, what are these next generation infrastructure criteria? I'm going to talk about all of them, but I'm going to break them down into parts first. The first 7 of the infrastructure criteria came from a project I worked on while I was getting my PhD at UCLA. I was a senior researcher at City Lab, and we had a competition called WPA 2.0, Working Public Architecture. And this was a response to the disaster decade of the 2000s, where we were seeing tragic and bigger infrastructure losses than we had ever in the past, such as the levee collapse after Hurricane Katrina and Rita. It was also a response to the Great Recession and a rising interest in social and environmental accountability in the design fields. So WPA 2.0 was a call for innovative design-based solutions that would be worthy of this national level effort to revitalize cities and put public back in public works. The next 4 came from work that I've done with students, both at the University of Arizona and Washington University. So what are these criteria? So there are originally 7, then 11, and a total of 12. So the first is that infrastructure has to be multifunctional. We can no longer allow the cost of investing as much as we do into things that only do one thing at a time. It has to capitalize on overlapping spatial, social, and economic investment. And this is an example by NL Architects called WAS 8, which is a heat transfer station, but it's also a basketball court, a climbing wall, a bird habitat, a green space. But most importantly, it uses the waste heat from energy production to provide hot water to everyone in the town of Utrecht. Second criteria is that infrastructure has to be public, and not just public funds, but it has to support inclusivity, engagement, and difference. It is social, but it is also civic. And this example is called Public Farm 1, and it was 150 different collaborators, farmers, politicians, horticulturists, social scientists, and local residents who worked together to cultivate 50 varieties of fruits and vegetables, but also generate power in this project, recycles rainwater, and provides public space for the neighborhood. Next generation infrastructure is visible. We have to see the energy and the resources that we're using so that we promote accountability and responsibility for personal consumption and for the impact on the commons. So this is a project by Big Architects, and I can't pronounce the actual name of it. It's a Dutch name, but not only does it actually put off a ring of smoke to recognize the carbon cost of the production of energy, it is also on the flip side a ski slope. The fourth criteria is that next generation infrastructure has to also be socially productive. What do I mean by socially productive? In addition to creating economic gain, it has to create social amenities. So these next generation infrastructure increase rather than decrease equity by providing new amenities, improving access, decreasing negative impacts, and increasing opportunities. And this project is an amazing project called Pitch Africa. It's a soccer pitch on the top that harvests and collects rainwater, stores it in a cistern, and then distributes that water to people in need. But it also has a health clinic beneath the pitch. And the idea of that health clinic is to allow women in particular to get tested and treated for HIV and AIDS without the stigma and prying eyes of partners and neighbors. Next gen infrastructure, sorry about that. Next gen infrastructure also has to be locally specific, flexible, and adaptable. And this is a project by Nicholas de Monchaux called Local Code, where he created a computer algorithm that incorporates resident feedback via electronic devices to create public space specific to that neighborhood and that moment in time. Next generation infrastructure is also sensitive to the eco-economy. It recognizes the interconnection of complex economic and ecological systems and prioritizes strategies of reuse, recycle, revitalize, and reinvent. This is a project by Lateral Office and Infernet Lab called Water Economies Ecologies, and it focuses on the Salton Sea by transforming it into new animal habitats and a salt production to boost a local struggling economy. Number 7 is driven by design. These next generation infrastructure projects are design prototypes, are demonstration projects. This was a project that I loved in the WPA 2.0 competition, Border Wall as Infrastructure by Real Sanfratello. It was originally 29 proposals that said there must be something better we can do with this massive investment in a border wall. And you may be familiar with the fact that Ron Real implemented this test project. And of all the projects that were finalists in our competition, I always like to say this is the one that actually was implemented. Next generation infrastructure is also symbiotic. So that means it is often using the waste of one process to be the fuel for another. At best, symbiosis taps into both the synthetic and the natural system. So this was the winning project called Carbon Tap or Tunnel Algae Park. And Carbon Tap collects the CO2 from cars in the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. It captures that CO2 and feeds it into these green pods to grow algae. It then uses that algae to create alternative fuels. It is also a bike and ped connectivity between the different New York boroughs. Next generation infrastructure is technologically smart. It includes technology that improves performance, safety, and access by using data and intelligence. And this is a project called the Baswa Shareway by Howler and Yoon. And here technology shows real-time arrival, on-demand autonomous vehicles, and makes commuting seamless and pollution-free. Number 10 is to work collaboratively across disciplines and agencies. And this is the 6th Street Viaduct project, and it is the new bridge going up in LA, and it incorporates architects and landscape architects and engineers on equal planes. And the project is also a recreation space, public space, growing food, harvesting water. It's sort of amazing new project happening in downtown Los Angeles. Number 11, it operates at both micro and macro scales simultaneously. So one thing we saw during the pandemic is that people started doing things out of their homes that they hadn't been for a long time. It gives us an agility into our infrastructure systems that we don't have when we only rely on large federal government scales. And when you combine all these criteria together, these are 2 sample projects from 2 classes that I taught at WashU, you can see that the parts add up to more than the pieces. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And it's not that you have to have all of these necessarily, but the collection of them makes for a stronger argument for next generation infrastructure. But in the very last one I want to argue for is that in reality, we still have to think about questions of equity, particularly beginning in the greater awareness that came in the last summer with the large moves around the Black Lives Matter movement. We have to really think about how benefits and opportunities are not equally distributed, and we are still very much reckoning with the unevenness and highly contested production of the places where we live. So lastly, next generation infrastructure, we know the uneven impacts of urban renewal. They are still happening. You can see this is still, in the last 3 years. So next generation infrastructure also has to be number 12, and that is reparative. We have to repair the damage done to populations and communities that have been oppressed, abused, or erased from lands where we built or plan to build. And this has to be a part of our 12 criteria for next generation infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. That was a very inspirational talk, and it was a pleasure to see all those different projects and even to see that one at the border wall come to fruition. We do have a question in the chat. Patricia asked if it was a very fast talk, and she asked if you might have a place where you can point people to see what these projects are more in depth. I don't know if there's a website or if you could put the project names in the chat or something.
Well, I happen to have a new book that you might have mentioned. It's all in the book, and I'm happy to post the link to that. But the WPA 2.0 projects, they are all on a WPA 2.0 website that we created at City Lab, and I will post that in chat as well. And you can either get to that through the City Lab primary site or through WPA 2.0.
Thank you very much. I have a question of my own too. As you went through these really amazing projects, they accomplished so much. As you said, they're kind of multifaceted in their benefits. And it struck me that the current mechanisms we use by which to decide what to do and what to build and how to do things, these things like environmental impact statements and cost benefit analyses, these mechanisms aren't really going to take us to this next gen future that you're talking about. And I'm curious what you see as the new mechanisms that might inform what it is we build, why we build it, where, and if those are quantifiable things like your 12 goals, are those kind of measured in numbers, or are we talking about a whole different way of measuring the benefit of projects?
Well, I didn't get much chance to talk about this measuring what matters question. Yeah. And I think that's part of it. As you said, cost benefit analysis, we're often looking at what are the economic advantages, and often what are the economic advantages for people like property owners or those who are already in power. When I've been working with real agencies on real projects. So the Arizona Department of Transportation is one of my partners on this I-11 Super Corridor project, and the city of St. Louis on the North Side, South Side Metrolink expansion. And what we're trying to convince them to do is take account of all these other measurable costs. So things like air pollution and asthma rates and life expectancy, people are not taking that into account necessarily when they're making decisions about infrastructure. One of the interesting things about something like the North Side, South Side Metrolink line in St. Louis is federal decisions about large scale loans for infrastructure are being decided based on different things. So that is a line of equity, not a line of ridership. And that's actually helping the city get funding for that particular project. And that wasn't true 10 years ago. So one way is, measuring what matters, getting people to think about different things. And I'm sort of inspired to be hearing more about GPI, genuine progress indicator, and donut economics. These are terms that we're hearing more readily in the news. And I hope the new infrastructure plan takes those into account.
Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you.
Really, really interesting talk.
Thanks.
All right, let's move into our next speaker. To make Vision Zero real, we know that we need smart engineering and we also need bold policies. However, before we get to those points, we first need to bring people together in an understanding that we all need to support this work. Ya-Ting has spent 15 years working on transportation and sustainability and environmental campaigns in New York City. as an advocate, organizer, and campaign strategist, and she managed the broad-based coalition of business, environmental, and transportation groups through the successful passage of the New York City congestion pricing campaign. Now, at VIA, she leads government relations and legislative policy at the state and local levels on the East Coast, pushing for policies that reduce car dependency. It's my pleasure to welcome Ya-Ting.
Thank you so much, Bahij, and thank you to all the speakers and everyone who's tuning in to this session. What an honor and privilege to be here. And as I was thinking about sort of what I wanted to say, I realized that, man, I've been in the game in a long time. So I wanted to kind of put together some of my learnings from the last 15 years. And it all goes back to how I first cut my teeth in all of this work, which was sort of as a newly formed tadpole out of urban planning graduate school out into the world, and getting sort of brought into the first congestion pricing campaign that started in earnest in 2007 under then Mayor Michael Bloomberg. So can you guys see the deck okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome, great. So let's get into it. So my talk, I just want to tell you a little bit about sort of my background, and so you have a sense of sort of what is informing my perspective, and share some of the 5 kind of top lessons and takeaways that I've learned throughout 15 years of, organizing, building coalition, managing campaigns, and really trying to get specific legislation and policy sort of over the finish line, both in New York City and in Albany, and then to sort of leave hopefully on an optimistic note about change, and that if it can happen in New York, it can definitely happen anywhere, and certainly wherever you may be tuning in. So first about me, I went to planning school and was sort of taught that like data and analysis, all of that kind of rigor is really important and key to policy making and policy change. And getting involved in that 2007 congestion pricing campaign took a lot of that stuff and sort of like threw it out the window. It was like a first eye sort of front row seats into real, the sort of really messy intersection where policy, politics, communications, organizing all came in. And it's that messy gray area is how things actually happened. And from there, I was so enthralled by the messiness of advocacy and really trying to make change happen on the ground, that I just kind of stayed in this movement and community. And I've been so privileged to have been worked, at all of these different organizations trying to advance the ball. But I think most importantly, I included the pictures of my 3 little peanuts over here, just because first and foremost, I think all of this work is so personal. As a mom of 3 young kids, we take 2 trains and the bus every day to get to and from school. And so I think I always come into this work, as a parent, raising young kids, navigating through cities, and thinking about how we can make a city that is safe, accessible, and sustainable, for them. So lesson 1 is that data is really important, but data alone is not enough. When I think about even back in 2007, so many incredible organizations like Tri-State Transportation Campaign or the Regional Plan Association, Pratt Institute, so many, and this is the thing about New York City too, we have such an incredible, robust advocacy community that is really complementary, that we're all working on these issues, for a long time. But in the 2007 campaign, we had done all of this analysis and data to look at, okay, who would be really impacted by a policy like this? We had district by district level fact sheets about who owns cars, the income to car ownership connection. And then not just that, you may own a car, you may have people in your district that own a car, but how many of those people are actually driving into the Manhattan Central Business District every day, right? So you guys get where we're going with this. So we brought the data, we brought the fact sheets, we brought all the stuff. And it was a real first opening experience where that didn't land the way that I thought it would with a lot of decision makers. And I remember at the time feeling just like really frustrated, like, oh, but the data alone, right? What speaks for itself. It's so clear, not just around, let's say, congestion pricing in terms of the New York City context, but when I think about, all these other topics like climate change or the rise in traffic fatalities, the rise in and just traffic and congestion, right? Post-pandemic, all of those things, you're seeing every day, but we're not seeing the same level of response and urgency in response, proportionate to all of these really alarming trends. So data is important, but data alone is not enough. Messengers really do matter. For us in the congestion pricing campaign, one of the things that we had in 2019, when New York finally passed congestion pricing, that we didn't necessarily have in 2007, is a groundswell of community-based support and more grassroots and community-based organizations. And so that is also really important, that it wasn't enough to just approach elected officials with data or even with a broader coalition of environmental transportation groups, but it's really important to show, their constituents are engaged and involved. And one of the things that I thought the advocates group, and I want to give a shout out to like the Riders Alliance, the New York City Environmental Justice Coalition, who really brought a community-based perspective to counter a common narrative that this is sort of elitist policy, or these policies are not serving working families, or would negatively impact working families. And it was really important to have people from those very communities actually, push back against that misconception of the impact of this policy. So your messenger matters, and it really you got to know sort of who you're talking to and who best to deliver that message that would have the maximum impact, on the person that you're trying to influence. Couple of other speakers touched on this. It's really important that we also be very clear and answer transportation for whom, and be really explicit about the benefits of the, let's say, like who's benefiting from like the status quo and who's being left out. And whatever your sort of policy change that you're proposing, let's say in this case, congestion pricing, it's very important to be very clear on who's going to benefit from a new policy change as well. And, again, I think for far too, it's unfortunately far too common when we think about a lot of the kind of new transportation solutions that are out there, whether it is, bikeways or bike share systems or secure bike parking or other types of sort of like transportation innovations or investments that might be happening, that it centers and it prioritizes, communities that are underserved by the existing system. And so that's something that I think we as a community that's active in this space must work hard to counter and push back against, to make sure that that there's an equitable distribution of these type of investments. This is other speakers have also touched on this, that inherently, yes, there is a technical aspect to transportation, but ultimately transportation is a political conversation. These are ultimately political decisions around which projects get prioritized, which projects gets invested in, and which doesn't. And I thought, the previous presentation really spoke well, right, about the sort of status quo versus an alternative approach. And I just threw this up because it just makes me, it's just to show that, like, with organizing, with a broad coalition, elected officials, they can move, right, on positions when they know that they have enough political support for doing the right thing. So elected officials aren't always necessarily sort of like so wedded to their positions either. And that, you can change their minds if you line up the politics, if you organize and engage with them in a political way. And I also want to say that, this is something that I would really encourage people to do more, which is to, like, engage with people starting when they're running for office. I'm a proud member of Streets PAC, and I think organizations like Streets PAC have really helped move the needle on this. And then never give up. 2007 is when we first started introducing and talking about congestion pricing in New York City. 2019 is when the New York State Legislature approved the congestion pricing framework. It's 2021, and we're still going through the regulatory approval process before it actually turns on. And organizations turned out really strong, continue to show up, continue to speak up, to advocate for congestion pricing and why it's so needed. So all of that work and that labor intensive work is really important. So never give up, keep showing up. Lastly, I want to leave you all with this. This picture kind of went viral a little bit. I've never seen this before. And this is a picture of Washington Square Park before it went car free in 1959. So I just want to have everybody, remember that once upon a time, Washington Square Park looked like this, and think about what it looks like today as an evidence that change, in fact, and radical change, in fact, is possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ya-Ting. It's an inspiration to hear from you and have you relay some of the experience you've gained over all the years you've been working in coalition with folks in New York City. I'm wondering, is there anybody who you think is really being overlooked and underrepresented in Vision Zero and Safe Streets coalitions? And if so, what do you believe advocates can do to bring those folks more into the fold? Is it something in messaging? Is it just not being in the right places, talking to the right people?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question, Bahij. I think there's two groups in particular that come to mind. One, for example, is around, let's say, the working cyclists or delivery cyclists. That has, recently gotten a lot of attention. It's been absolutely amazing to see in how they have organized themselves and been pushing for change and becoming more and more of and sort of exercising their collective, voice to push for change and to bring to attention a lot of the policy gaps and safety gaps that them as a community particularly address. But I think it's my friend Shabazz Stewart has pointed out, frequently in the past that, for example, the New York City DOT bicycling report doesn't necessarily count them in their analysis in terms of, like, cycling trends in the city. So that's, like, really one small example. Another group, I think about is our immigrant community in New York City. In the pandemic, that we saw that it's those same communities that did not have the luxury of working from home, really worked a lot of essential jobs that kept the city running and relied on the city's sort of transportation infrastructure more broadly, whether it's public transit, whether it's the streets, for cycling, in order to keep the city running. And I would love to sort of think about ways that we can really engage some of the delivery worker organizations, and then also the immigrant advocacy organizations, to get them into the fold around how we change the built environment and make sure that investments are equally distributed.
Thank you so much, Ya-Ting, for highlighting those two groups. Among many others, I'm sure that we still need to build coalition with, but those two are ready partners, and some of them are active already in ways that we need to start partnering more with. Thank you. Now on to our final speaker. How do we as advocates and transportation professionals communicate what we do and why we do it to the public? If you've ever seen a traffic safety PSA, you probably understand the challenge. Our next speaker, Mr. Barricade on TikTok, may have the answer. Vignesh Swaminathan is principal in charge at Crossroad Lab. For more than a decade, he's worked with municipalities, resource agencies, and Caltrans to plan, design, and deliver bridge, roadway, and infrastructure improvements throughout California, including protected intersections and bike facilities. Vignesh also sits as the chair of the Cupertino Sustainability Commission and the Valley Transportation Agency Citizen Advisory Committee. It's my pleasure to welcome Vignesh.
Thank you, Bahij. Give me a minute while I set this up. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here and present to you all about the great work that we have been doing over the last few years here. So my name is Vignesh Swaminathan. I started the firm Crossroad Lab with frustrations being a civil engineer. This screenshot of the center is an old screenshot, but my TikTok channel now has 1.1 million followers and 950 million views. We reach a broad range of audiences, and I don't speak to engineers and planners alone. I speak to all types of users of TikTok and of our community. My past experiences, I did a lot of traffic control for downtown San Jose, managing events, festivals, and marathons. And I worked as a highway engineer doing freeway interchanges, grading and drainage structures and utility relocations. And now I run Crossroad Lab. In addition to my chair role at the city of Cupertino and my chair role at the Valley Transportation Agencies, I also, it's not on here, but I also sit as on the policy board of MTC, which is our local MPO. I quit my job as a highway consulting firm because I was kind of exposed to a lot of the issues of urban planning. I built a lot of highway widening through low-income communities and did a lot of freeway interchange projects through these communities, and I opened my eyes. I always like to start my presentation to kind of talk about the roots of civil engineering and why we do what we do. And it's a combination of safety and drainage. On TikTok, I call my followers Drain Gang and Traffic Control, where I talk about equity and drainage and flood control, and I also talk about better design for our infrastructure. So we are all water-based human beings on this water-based planet. And throughout our history, we've had water and drainage being used to manipulate our communities and build out infrastructure, and also marginalize many different communities from empires and civilizations. And on the bottom screenshot is where my family is from, in Tamil Nadu, India, where they've always been working with flood zones and drainage for centuries. In America, we're not alone to changes in drainage. Many of our native populations lived amongst rivers and creeks, and they would shift and migrate as the creeks and rivers would meander. And as our country went into a more of an agricultural and suburban times, we manipulated drainage to go around. We manipulated drainage from being as natural. And then as we build more infrastructure, roadways and highways, and through redlined communities, we've always been messing with drainage. The center image right here is a screenshot, is a front cover of a public works standard detail that talks about curb gutter. And that public works standard details are here before slavery was abolished. So we've been talking about doing curb and gutter and drainage modifications for a very, very long time. And on the top, you'll see a screenshot of a typical cross-section, and that we have clear zones that are actually kept for distracted and drunk drivers. So the drunk drivers would have a place to kind of end up on the side of the street. And that's because a lot of our roadway were designed for including drunk driving, because drinking and driving only became illegal after we had roadways for many, many years. So our system is been manipulating drainage and messing with safety and going through urban redline communities for a very, very long time. Some of our best practices now that we try to do is try to accommodate for different types of bees and pollinating animals, to have wildlife corridors to rejuvenate and get back to more natural times. We also try to plan for along the riparian areas to not only have pedestrian and bike access, but also have access for fox and other rodents to go from the hills to the bay and keep our existing ecology. And on the top, in the center, you'll see a regular flood map. It's a historically redlined community where I live right now in East Palo Alto. It's not Palo Alto, which is nice. It's East Palo Alto, which is historically a flood zone, and it will flood someday due to sea level rise. And on the top right, you'll see a great screenshot of what we would like to do with stormwater management, but there's many, many steps in between getting from where we are now to there. Most of our crashes are due to weaving, and that's because we plan out our roadways like highways. Most of the crashes on highways are actually due to weaving as well. Instead of crossing, we weave. And the way weaving is supposed to be designed, according to traffic theory, is vehicles are going at a similar speed and they exchange and they weave across lanes. Now, for some reason, in our country, we've been expecting bicyclists to weave with traffic when a cyclist only can go maybe 5 to 15, maybe 20 miles per hour, and a vehicle will turn along our large truck radii at above 15 or 20 miles per hour, and this will be fatal and this will cause a crash. In our current standards right now, we mainly have bike lanes. We have green bike lanes, which is new. I worked on many of the first green bike lanes and first buffered bike lanes here in California. And on the top, you'll see a screenshot that Caltrans recommends to put a bike lane next to a left turn pocket. That will require cyclists to weave across multiple lanes to get to the left turn pocket, but that's our standard detail here in Caltrans. What you see on the right is what we try to encourage folks to cross in 2 stages. And the reason we try to encourage folks to cross in 2 stages is we want to have less weaving and more crossing. And so the question is, do we want to have folks weave or cross? And the answer, in my opinion, is cross. A protected intersection is a solution that we've learned from the Netherlands, and it's worked very, very well, where we encourage cyclists to cross, and it forces cyclists to cross in 2 stages. And it can be designed for all types of vehicles. The main goal, as you see in the center image right here, is we want the vehicle to cross the bicycle perpendicularly, so that way we can eliminate the blind spot that is there. Most of the crashes happen because a driver is on the opposite side of a cyclist and they're not as perpendicular. And so that is why we have a lot of crashes, but the protected intersection is supposed to try and encourage protected perpendicular crossing. And a cyclist does have to cross in 2 stages, and that's more like a pedestrian than how cyclists are treated right now, like vehicles. Now, for us engineers, we don't have a lot of standards. We have a highway design manual, which we use. Federal put out a separated bikeway guide, which is very limiting. Massachusetts created a separated bikeway guide, but they've only implemented 2 intersections based on this guide that are fully protected. And so we're very limited in terms of our examples. And the center images is what Caltrans allows us to do for protected bike lanes. And this is a diagram, looks like it was made in Microsoft Word, but that's the best we got right now in terms of standards done by our government. So that's why we made our own standards here at Crossroad Lab, and we worked with NACTO to develop them through our experiences. We've done a lot of pilot demonstration and temporary and permanent installations, and we put all of our best practices into Don't Give Up at the Intersection guidance. It's a great guidance that I helped write, and it's published by NACTO. And the reason it's called Don't Give Up at the Intersections is because most engineers would like to give up at the intersection and let the bike lane go dashed or make there be no bike lane, because they would rather liability be onto the user than liability be onto good design. And so this document was created by many professionals across the country, and many lessons learned from the projects that I've worked on and designs that I've worked on to consolidate all the information, because AASHTO is taking about 4 or 5 years just to even approve of a new design guidance. It sucks that we have to go rely on a highway agency to come up with designs for our complete streets, but that's what it is. So we published our own guidance because we didn't want to wait any longer. A lot of what the projects I do to help with roadway safety is try to get to permanent installation, where we actually put in curbs and build out these protected facilities. However, what we do, because the community is scared of this, is a new change for the community to have these facilities. So we do a lot of demonstration and pilot projects with cones, plants, temporary barricades, and more. And that's how we get people to become comfortable with these type of facilities. I will talk a little bit about this phased approach and how this phased approach can help apply for grants to actually get permanent installation and actually do the stormwater management that I talked about it earlier in the presentation. Here's a screenshot of the guidance of the protected intersection, and it kind of recommends more temporary materials and 2 radii, 1 radii for large trucks, 1 radii for passenger vehicles. So if any passenger vehicle is really trying to cut the corner, they go over these little bumps that we've installed. And this has proven to be very, very successful, encourage more and more cyclists. And we've had a significant reduction in crashes and no fatalities in downtown San Jose after that. And I'm proud to say that after 4 years of this project being out there. I have a short video to present. The audio's a little off here, but this is a video that of the kind of TikToks that I.
Hey all, Mr. Barricade here to show you a fully protected intersection with all 4 corners protected in San Jose, California. This is Almaden Road and San Fernando right here, and it was designed by yours truly. Let's check it out. The vehicle stop bar is placed right here. That's a good 20 to 30 feet from where the bicycles wait in this forward bicycle box. And so when a bike approaches the intersection, they come wait to this bike box while the vehicles are waiting back here. And when the green light goes, the bike gets a head start in front of the vehicle. To reduce the risk of any sort of crash on a green phase, we put a very tight radius here. So a vehicle is forced to slow down when making this turn, and they view the bike at a better angle and not in their blind spot. And so when a bicycle wants to make a left turn, they cross on a green phase and they come right to this box and they wait here for the next phase, which comes right after. This helps inexperienced cyclists, people in scooters, and folks in mobility scooters. So come check it out in San Jose, California.
So
Hey all,
this
Mr.
project was
Barricade
done very, very quickly with paint and plastic because we didn't want to wait for drainage and wait for CEQA and wait for environmental review. So a lot of the projects that I do is I try to avoid modifications to drainage and things that cause delay that most engineers like to make money off of, so we can actually deliver projects quickly. I realized the completion cost, this is actually our design fee, it's not the actual construction cost, but the city was going to spend $32,000 on doing pavement rehab, and our entire project cost about $1.6 million added to that for all the paint and plastic. Then in addition, that actually reduced the amount of significant amount of crashes and encouraged scooters in downtown San Jose. This eventually leads into fully built out raised protected intersections where we fully grade and drain them, and they get quite complicated and they have to go through environmental permitting. And here's an example of projects that we worked on in Fremont, but these take a while to do. And so doing it in temporary plastic, it helps to eventually get money to build these projects fully and or to get political buy-in by the community. And then the community's begging for it to be made out of concrete when you put it in plastic first. Many agencies argue saying, hey, this is not MUTCD compliant, but I've designed it so they are MUTCD compliant. You can't argue with these kind of facilities, and there's definitely modifications to that. The way I've done that is I've put a double wide line, which according to the vehicle code is a barrier. And so technically I modify the edge of travelway. And so bikes are essentially on a new kind of sidewalk. And we've done different versions of this through the pandemic to kind of help cities edge these kind of projects along to eventually get fully protected intersections that have stormwater management. We've also done a lot of pilot projects in different cities. Here's one we did in Mountain View where they did a master plan for many years. They spent about 10 years doing a master plan, and then they spent another 5 years waiting around, and then 6 years forgetting about it, and then 2 years forgetting about it, and then they decided they wanted to start to revamp it. And so to rejuvenate the idea, we did do some of this stuff with paint, plastic, and roadway tape, and we're able to get these projects done fairly quickly. This was built in about 2 days. And it helped the city study it a little bit so they could see if they actually wanted to invest in what they had planned. Most projects happen in a design bid build fashion, which leaves it entirely up to the contractor. And so the city engineer does everything that they want to do to make it to the Cadillac kind of project. The city value engineers it to cut it down, and the city chooses lowest bid, and that's design bid build. We're trying to get to a more design build approach where cities take ownership over their facilities. This is similar to how building owners do design build, where the owner of the building is working with a designer and a contractor instead of it being in 2 separate phases. And eventually we want to get an integrated project delivery where the city is ongoing producing these projects, working with the community, working with consultants and doing stuff internally, and where there's less control by the contractor. But right now, our system by government is very much too much control by the contractor in design, bid, build. And that's why we don't get the great projects that we would like to get.
Vignesh,
What I do with
running
my
up on time, all right?
Okay. What I do with my TikTok is I try to communicate these things a little bit simpler. So I talk about stuff instead of it being plan, specs, and estimate, I talk about it as an exhibit memo cost. And this is a way to get projects done. And I found that using an exhibit memo cost just moves things along really well. Here's an example of an exhibit where we don't hide the actual problem. We didn't show that we put a transparent hatch and we highlighted all the utility conflicts and other type of modifications that we needed to do. And these get kind of complicated when you get into plans. Here you see every type of bicycle facility and its second cousin in these two intersections. That's because downtowns have one-ways and two-way streets, and they get quite complex. What we'd like to do is we'd like to not get away from having community leaders come bug city staff to have signature projects and have the city work with community leaders to have more ongoing projects. And this is proven to allow for art and other types of culture to be able to actually get done instead of waiting 4 or 5 years to eventually implement whatever was said in the original master plan. And I was proud to say as Crossroad Lab, none of our projects have lasted more than 10 months from concept to construction. There's many different ways that projects can come about through different art programs or through PTA or even through politicians that just push it forward. And on the top, you'll see a city of Cupertino where an ex-mayor knew how to work the system and was able to get a trail built in everybody's backyard within a matter of months. This is one of the videos that I won't show right now, but this is a video, well, I guess I'll show a little bit of it. This is a
Mr. Barricade here to show how we took away a lane and added an on-street trail in a residential neighborhood on Doyle Street in Emeryville, California, designed by yours truly. Let's check it out. We reduced the traffic by introducing traffic diversion so cars do not get on the street anymore.
And I'll show you that, but you guys can check it out on my TikTok and my LinkedIn page. But basically, we took away a lane, gave the streets back to the community, and this project was done as part of the paving project. And we were able to work with the community by doing this with temporary barriers first, testing it for months, thinking about the parking loss, and then eventually implement this with more semi-permanent facilities. These projects can range from just being like one intersection to a full corridor, and they also can incorporate technology. So this was a project that we did where there was an emergency crosswalk needed for one of the tech campuses. The city required us to do a lighting study for the whole corridor just to delay the project. It just would have taken a while. And instead we use a private product that when you press the flashing beacon, it shines light and kind of is a spotlight on the pedestrians. And I was able to convince the city to use this beacon to implement the project within a matter of months. So Facebook hired us to build a crosswalk between two of their campuses to get their employees across. And we built this in 3 months from where do you want the crosswalk to construction, because we were able to avoid the lighting study and avoid drainage modifications. And we still build ADA compliant curb ramps. And
that looked great. And you've got a couple of questions in the chat of people who are interested to hear.
Sure.
So I'm going to start posing those questions if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that's just what I would close with is these projects don't have to take a long time if you talk about it in the construction terms. And
somebody's particularly curious about those demonstration projects you do. And they're wondering about, do you get sanction from the city when you do those types of temporary modifications to show what the project will be like?
Yes, they're sponsored by the city. Basically, there'll be certain planners in the city that want to implement these facilities, and we will work with them and talk to fire department, trash pickup, public works in their terminology. So I'll talk about to the fire department and be like, you can run this over. I'll talk to the different trash loaders about how they're going to deal with their dumpster. And I don't talk about it as a bike lane project. I just talk about to every single person in the city as what their focus is. And their focus is not bike lanes. Most people don't care about bike lanes, but talking to the police about how they will ticket folks, talking to the restaurants about how their beer truck will load is the type of conversations we need to have complete streets conversations opposed to bike lane conversations.
Thank you. I'll pose a last question here from the chat. Somebody loves you. They love Mr. Barricade, but they're wondering what happened to the mustache.
Once I hit 1 million followers, I promised everybody that I'll shave my mustache, and I'm a man of my word, and that's what I did. And many people don't recognize me. Many people know me as doing drain gang is a move that I do with my mustache when I talk about drainage. But now I'm happy to do that with no mustache.
Thank you so much. And thank you very much to all of our panelists and to our whole audience for joining us today for the Vision Zero Vignettes. It's been a total pleasure to MC today. Thank you very much to Linda, Juliet, Vignesh, Rebecca, and Ya-Ting for sharing all their knowledge and sharing some inspiration with us, sharing some powerful words and some of the things they've learned and all the work that they've done. I'd also like to thank all the attendees for coming out to the Vision Zero Cities Conference. This marks the final virtual talk of the conference, although I hope that folks will be joining us tomorrow for some field visits, where we're going to be outside actually seeing each other in person and seeing a little bit of what some of this work looks like in the real world. Once again, thank you all. I'm Bahij Chancey. Very nice to see everybody. And I'll give you your evenings.